Good morning. Welcome to New Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us. This week's analysts are former state senator and mayor of Portland Ethan Strimling and former state senator and Yarmouth town councilor Phil Harriman. Gentlemen, as always, good to see you.
Good morning, Pat.
And here we are, blessedly just a couple of days away, not only from Election Day,
Right.
but the end of political ad season
Yes.
for a little while.
What do you mean blessedly? This is like the time we live for.
Well, the election is fine. The
Yeah.
ads, I think people are pretty much tired of. I'm pretty sure. I know the candidates are even sick of themselves. So, in any case, let's carry on first. People for and against the idea of a consumer-owned utility say they have collected enough signatures to get their competing plans on the ballot a year from now. The group Our Power has more than 80,000 signatures to replace CMP and Versant with a consumer-owned Pine Tree Power company. A business and labor coalition called Maine Affordable Energy has more than 90,000 signatures for their proposal called No Blank Checks, which would require a statewide vote on any new government debt of over $1 billion. Surely something that the investor-owned utilities would, to buy them out, would probably cost. Phil, how do you see this playing out as this goes forward?
This is probably going to be one of the more important defining questions for the future of Maine. Do we want to have essentially a government-run utility company, or do we keep it in the hands of the private investors who are accountable to the Public Utilities Commission? And when you said, Pat, you have a coalition of business and labor and 90,000 signatures, as I understand it, they're gearing up for what is going to be a very important decision for the future of Maine.
Ethan?
yeah, well, plus tens of millions of dollars funded by CMP, right? That's how they got those signatures. They paid everybody to go get them. Whereas on the consumer-owned utility, I volunteered for them on Election Day last year to get signatures. And let me tell you, all you needed to do was say, hey, you want to get rid of CMP? Sign here. And people flocked because CMP's favorables at the moment are so low, rightfully so, because of all the rate increases, because of their lack of accountability, because 15% of every bill that you pay goes overseas to some out-of-state, out-of-country corporation, and people are really tired of CMP. So I think the COU is actually going to do very well. They're going to go up against really serious money, but we saw that serious money lost the corridor pretty significantly. I think the one that they're trying to pass that deals with the government debt, I hope that folks like Phil come out against that one. You know, that is one that's basically saying we ought to tie the hands of government from being able to do what it needs to do when it needs to borrow money. It's clearly a veiled attempt to just try to get rid of this, but it has some serious ramifications.
Another bunch of signatures submitted at the State House this week, campaign finance reform petitions. It's an effort to prevent foreign government interference in campaigns and take dark money away from nonprofits, which are not required to release a list of their donors. Under current rules, foreign governments cannot contribute to candidate campaigns, but the FEC has said it has no control over state referendum campaigns. This has bipartisan support at the State House. Ethan, is it a good idea?
Yeah, it's a very good idea. It does have bipartisan support. They also were able to get a lot of signatures, mostly from volunteers. You know, we need to get corporate influence out of our politics. They can't do it for candidates. It makes total sense to not allow them to do it into referendum as well, foreign corporations. So I do hope this will pass. You know, it's a piece of the puzzle. There are other things in Portland. We're trying to pass clean elections across the board. Everybody's really trying to focus on how do we get this money out of politics, because the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has left us a mess.
You know, this is one of those issues that sounds great on the surface, but when you look a little deeper, you say to yourself, well, what if some company, we just talked about CMP, which is owned by a Spanish company, they would not be allowed to defend their positions, or say Hannaford Brothers owned by a Belgian company, and there is some public controversy, they wouldn't be able to spend money to tell their side of the story. So I think there's probably some constitutionality questions, but it's probably going to be very popular at the polls, and it'll have to get tested in the courts.
Now, all of that is in our future, probably a year from now, assuming they both get on the ballot. But let's talk about the election that's coming up next week. And President Joe Biden says democracy is under attack. A few days ago, the president urged voters to save American democracy from Trump supporters' election-denying lies and the political violence that he says they have inspired. Phil, is that message going to have any impact, or is this something, as Mitch McConnell said, simply the president saying, oh, democracy only works if our side wins?
Well, I think the truth is, Pat, that people who are going to vote for the Republicans have already made up their mind, and for the Democrats as well. I suspect President Biden was trying to appeal to those soft voters or people who may vote on impulse, that this is your reason to go vote. I just see it very differently. He has no policy that he can claim has been a resounding success on all fronts, economic front, environmental front, and others, where people would say, yeah, I'm going to go support the president because of his policies. He's basically saying, go support the Democrats because the other guys are worse.
Ethan?
You need to read different newspapers and watch different TV, my friend, because people look at the economy. They see unemployment is incredibly low, right? They do recognize that. They recognize what Biden did around COVID to try to bring down the rates of death and, all of his health care plans and the infrastructure bill that was just passed. So people see a lot of success, but there is a lot of fear about our democracy right now. And I think he is tapping into that fear, rightfully so. I mean, there are 300 candidates right now who are running for federal or statewide office who are flat out election deniers, who claim that elections that were legitimate weren't. And they are the puppets of Donald Trump, and he understands that. And there's a lot of fear in America that we are going to be electing into positions people who are not going to accept the results, right? One person, one vote. Count every vote. That's what America believes in. That's what democracy is. Having people in office who won't do that, that is scary.
Portland has more than a dozen referendum questions for voters to decide this coming week. Question D is getting a lot of attention. That would increase the city's minimum wage, including for tipped workers. And it has gotten some very high-profile support. Hillary Clinton, Jane Fonda, and Senator Bernie Sanders have all urged support for this measure. Ethan, are you surprised to see this in a municipal election, and does it influence the outcome at this level?
It's very surprising. It very rarely happens, and I think it's happening here because of the significance of it. I've obviously been very involved in this campaign, but I want to be clear that I think people are making up their minds for themselves, but what this does is it kind of really undermines the opposition's argument that this is some extremist idea from, the outside the mainstream. When people like Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders agree on something, I mean, how often do they agree? Almost never. That kind of tells the average voter, okay, maybe these folks who are opposing this are actually the extremists, and I'm going to look at this a little more closely and vote the way I think is best for our workers in the city.
I think from a political marketing campaign, it's been brilliant because we're talking about it on Sunday morning while everybody's having a cup of coffee and the election's 2 days away. I'm not so sure Portland residents are going to be influenced from people who don't live here, who really don't have a sense of what our day-to-day life and economics are, but certainly they brought it top of mind, and it'll be interesting to see if it succeeds.
All right. I think just real quick, I think the question of who's from here, not from here, that always can be a legitimate issue. You need people out there who you trust, and I think that's part of it. But remember, almost $1 million has been raised from out of state on the other side, so they don't have a whole lot of credibility on the outside versus inside issue.
All right, here's the stuff you guys love. Election predictions. You got your prognosticators hats on.
We love them today, but don't talk to us again Wednesday. Because
all right, so let's talk about what's going to happen and why. Phil, let's start with the first congressional district.
I think Shelley Pingree gets reelected easily. Ed Thielander had a few missteps along the way, but recovered nicely, and I think has got a future if he chooses to want to continue to serve down the road.
Yeah, I think Phil's got it right. I don't know about the serving down the road thing. I think probably maybe he could run for the state senate, but this race is really about how much does Shelley Pingree win by. I think she will win by more than double digits, so I expect it'll be somewhere between 55 and 60%.
The real race, and one of the biggest races in the country for the House of Representatives, is Maine's 2nd Congressional District. What's going to happen there?
Oh, can't you have Phil answer this first? Because this one's making me sweat. But yeah, this one's tough. I mean, I think that Golden is going to win it, and I think he will win both the plurality and then win in ranked choice. But it is a very tight race. This is the hardest one, I think, to call just because that district is so conservative. I think Golden has really done a good job of sort of walking the line. He's getting more support from Republicans than he would otherwise. But remember, that's like 13 or 14% versus 7 or 8%, but that could be the difference. So I think that Golden will return for his third term.
Unless Bruce Poliquin can get over 50% in the first ballot, I think Jared Golden is going to win in a ranked choice voting.
Well, so see what happens in the Maine legislature first. What becomes of the Maine House?
I think the Maine House of returns to the hands of the Republicans for the first time, and I forget how many years, but I think they're going to have a clear majority, probably by about 8 to 10 seats.
I actually think Phil's right about this. I think it'll be tighter. I think it'll only be a couple of seats, but I just think there's going to be more of a Republican push, especially in the second CD, and I think that may give them just enough to get like 76 to 75, 77, 74, something like that. But I am fearful Republicans will win this one.
And who controls the Maine Senate for the next session?
Democrats will hold on to this one. It's just, I think they will lose seats, but it's just too steep of a hill to climb. They've got a 22 seat right now. You know, they're at 22 to 13. It's just too big of a margin. So I think it'll drop down to like 19, 16, something like that. But Democrats will stay in control.
That is a lot to flip. Can the Republicans do it?
Well, I think it depends on the Troy Jackson race up in Aroostook County. If that goes toward Sue Bernard, I think you'll see Republicans getting an 18-17 majority.
The big enchilada here, the race for governor. It's there are 3 candidates, but only 2 of them really have a shot to win. Who's going to win this?
I've got Governor LePage 50.1% of the vote.
I got Janet Mills. I think actually she's going to win it relatively comfortably. I think it'll be 53%, something like that. I think Sam will get 2 or 3%, and LePage will get the rest.
So they've been hammering Janet Mills pretty hard and saying, well, she's not doing anything about inflation. Is that stuff sticking or not?
I don't think it's sticking in the sense of, is Janet Mills doing anything about it? I think inflation is an issue. Democrats, I think, have made a mistake sometimes to not address it or to try to minimize it. It is impacting people's pocketbooks, and they need to have answers about how. But I think what she said is, I can't control inflation, which of course she can't, but I can try to get some more money into people's pockets, and I think people do understand and appreciate that.
And Phil, Maine has not turned out an incumbent governor running for re-election since 1966.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a tough hill to climb for Paul LePage, and I think it's going to come down to how enthusiastic are his supporters in the 2nd District, who will be able to overcome what perceivably is Janet Mills' Southern District advantage.
Well, let's wrap it up, not with our usual winners and losers in politics of the past week, but I want your winner and loser wild card predictions. So, Ethan, we'll start with you.
I'll start with the winner. I'm going to go with a little referendum in Cape Elizabeth in which they're voting for the largest school bond to rebuild their schools. A little disclosure, my partner's working on the campaign, so I got a little inside info, but no polling. Anyway, I think they're going to vote for that. It would be historic if it happens to rebuild their schools. My loser actually is going to be Donald Trump, and that's around the Secretary of State races around the country. He's invested a lot of money to try to get people into Secretary of State races that who will support him in 2024. I don't think he's going to be successful in that.
Phil, what do you got?
My unexpected loser is Troy Jackson up in Aroostook County. I think Sue is going to win that race. And my unexpected winner, wild card, is Republicans take over the U.S. Senate.
All right, we shall see. And we'll see you both on Tuesday night for election night analysis as it unfolds and see who was right about all these predictions. At least we hope we'll find out. That's Political Brew for this week. Thanks for being with us. News Center Maine is back after this.